Okay. So I've said that I was going to search and find what I can on possible other charges and celebrities connected to Diddy. And it seems, as with Epstein, people are distancing themselves from this train wreck. Over the weekend, Usher, who lived with Diddy for a year in the '90s to learn from him, has erased his posts on X over the weekend. Pink also deleted her posts. So who else will we see deleting posts? Maybe ex-girlfriend J-Lo? She hasn't yet, but I'll keep watching. Tonight I was going to read a summons, a lawsuit brought against, or this one is filed by the plaintiff, April Lampros. Throughout my reading, I'm going to try to just refer to her as Ms. L, just because I don't want to continuously use her name again and again. So she is the plaintiff. And in this lawsuit, we see the defendants Sean Combs, Bad Boy Records, Arista Records, a subsidiary of Sony Music Entertainment, John and Jane Doe's 1 through 10, and ABC Corp's 1 through 10. To the named defendants, you are at this moment summoned to answer the complaint in this action and serve a copy of your answer, or if the complaint is not served with this summons, to serve a notice of appearance on the plaintiff's attorneys within 20 days after the service of the summons. So basically saying that if you don't respond, then if you fail to respond or answer, the judgment will be taken for the relief demanded herein. So we will go down to the introduction. Plaintiff L brings this action seeking injunctive, declaratory, and monetary, I don't know why I couldn't say that word, relief against defendants in violation of the Victims of Gender Motivated Violence Protection Law, Gender Motivated Violence Act, NYC Admin Code. This cause of action is timely under the Victims of Gender Motivated Violence Protection Law, Gender Motivated Violence Act, NYC Admin, because it arises out of conduct perpetrated against plaintiff who was the statutory age or older at the time. And then there's the footnote basically telling us that the NYC Victims of Gender Motivated Violence Protection Act created a look-back window on March 1st of 2023, which ran for 2 years. So victims still have, another year? For survivors of gender-motivated violence, allowing them to sue their abusers regardless of when the abuse occurred. We're going to go down now. Of the conduct which constitutes multiple sexual offenses as defined in Article 130 of the New York Penal Law. This suit arises from the actions of defendants Sean Combs, Mr. Combs, Bad Boy Records, BB, Arista Records, AR, a subsidiary of Sony Music Entertainment, SME, John and Jane Doe's 1 through 10, and ABC Corp's 1 through 10, and their participation in the harm visited upon plaintiff L, Miss L. So Miss L is a Caucasian female and a United States citizen who was at all relevant times relevant to the action, a resident of the domicile in the state of New York. Mr. Combs is a United States citizen and was at all relevant times a resident and domiciled in the state of New York. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs is currently domiciled both in California and Florida. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs divides his time equally between both states. Upon information and belief, AR is a global music company headquartered in New York. Upon information and belief, BB is a global music company headquartered also in New York. Upon information and belief, SME is a global music company headquartered also in New York. During the relevant period, defendants John and Jane Doe's 1 through 10 are currently unknown individuals and/or employees who aided and/or abetted in the commission of conduct complained of herein, and/or who either acted within the scope of their employment, defendants ratified, embraced, and added to this conduct. As parties engage in discovery, plaintiff retains the right to amend the complaint to add these individual employees by name. During the relevant period, defendants ABC Corp. 1 through 10 are currently unknown entities who employed plaintiff or aided and abetted in the commission of conduct complaint, same thing as the last one. So jurisdiction and venue. This court has personal jurisdiction over the defendant under and consistent with the constitutional requirements of due process in that the defendant acting directly or through his agents or apparent agents committed one or more of the following. A, the transaction of any business within the state. B, the making of any contract within the state. C, the commission of a tortious act within this district. And D, the ownership, use, or possession of any real estate in the state. Thank you, son. Summary of factual accusations. Upon information and belief, Ms. L met Mr. Combs in early 1994 after the birth of his first son, Justin Dior Combs. At the time, Ms. L was a college student at the Fashion Institute of Technology, studying fashion design and marketing. To impress her, Mr. Combs would often invite her to Bad Boy recording studios in New York City. And then is pictured Ms. L, Sean Combs, and a friend in Bad Boy in the studio. When she met Mr. Combs, Ms. L shared with him her dreams of working in the fashion industry, and Mr. Combs promised to mentor her and help her by introducing her to music and fashion industry executives, as well as assisting her with finding work. It's all the power and the money. Mr. Combs love bombed her. He showered her with gifts and flowers, as evidenced by one of the cards that accompanied the flowers that Mr. Combs sent Miss L for Valentine's Day in 1994. And there's the picture of the card, Happy Valentine's Day, love Puppy. I don't know why anybody would sign a Valentine's Day card like that. That just seems a little over the top, ridiculous. Mr. Combs went so far as to invite Miss L to his first Father's Day celebration. The invitation to that event is below. So here we see it, and I will read what the invitation said. Dear friends, on June 19th, 1994, Bad Boy Entertainment would like for you to come and join us in celebrating the original Bad Boy's first Father's Day celebration. For this occasion, there is a dress code. No jeans or sneakers will be permitted. This spectacular event will be held at the Capitol located at that address. The event will begin promptly at 10 p.m. and will go on until, well, I guess whenever. Please come early to avoid any inconvenience. For further information, you can contact the offices of Bad Boy Entertainment at blah, blah, blah. Remember, the dress code will be strictly enforced, so dress your best. Thanks for your support. Sincerely, Bad Boy Entertainment. This invite admits one. Now, on this, I think it's funny that it's a Father's Day celebration. In the picture, he's got his child on his lap, but yet they're going to be partying at 10 p.m. where the child, I'm assuming, is not going to be there. Right. I think we always celebrate Mother's Day and Father's Day with our children in my family and the families I know. But I don't know this man, so. A month after the Father's Day event, Mr. Combs invited Miss L to an exclusive Bad Boy party with performances by Usher, Craig Mack, and the Notorious B.I.G. And there's the invitation right there. This one's a little harder to read just because of the way it's laid out here. But this invite admits only one and is non-transferable. But even in this picture, he's got his child on the couch with it. It's just, I don't know. I don't understand this man. Upon information and belief that what Mr. Combs displayed as kind gestures quickly manifested into an aggressive, coercive, and abusive relationship based on S. These acts were not isolated to the state of New York, as Mr. Combs would fly Miss L to Atlanta to see him, where they would spend time together. Miss L would also fly to Miami to see Mr. Combs at his home. And then another picture of Miss L at Mr. Combs' home in Florida. Upon information and belief throughout the years with Mr. Combs, there were 4 terrifying S encounters Miss L endured. According to Miss L, Mr. Combs had a terrible temper and often threatened to harm her if she failed to do what he said, if he witnessed her talking to other men, or if she failed to take his phone calls. According to Miss L, she was also not allowed to talk about her relationship with Mr. Combs to anyone because he did not want anyone to know he was seeing her because she is a white woman. SA Encounter 1. The first horrific S encounter occurred in 1995 when Miss L met up with Mr. Combs in South Houston Street Bar. She was introduced to a woman named redacted, so we don't know who that is yet. I'll find out. And the group lightly drank throughout the evening. At the time, Ms. L was a college student and did not drink any alcohol. Due to Mr. Combs' delusional and violent outbursts, she succumbed to pressure and reluctantly drank with Mr. Combs and whoever the other person was. As they drank, Ms. L began to feel uneasy. At this point, she had only had a few sips of one drink. Miss L and redacted were guided to a vehicle and left the bar with Mr. Combs. They arrived at the Millennium Hotel. While at the hotel, Miss L continued to feel uneasy. She recalls feeling like the walls are closing in on her. She was laid on the hotel bed where Mr. Combs forced himself on top of her. Mr. Combs began to kiss Miss L, and as she turned her head, trying to avoid the interaction, he grabbed her face. Mr. Combs continued to kiss her forcibly. Ms. L informed him that she wasn't feeling well, but he ignored her words and continued to take off her clothing. Ms. L tried to hold onto her clothing, but she felt weak and powerless in this situation. Ms. L pleaded with Mr. Combs to stop, and he ignored her. Ms. L could not process why this was occurring and felt a complete loss of control. Ms. L was being AR'd by Mr. Combs, and she soon passed out. The next morning, Ms. L was awoken by the sun peering through the drapes. She was nude, sore, and confused. Ms. L quickly got out of bed, clothed herself, and left the hotel room as fast as she could. Months after the first R, Mr. Combs pursued Ms. L to send her gifts. He sent her gifts, cards, and flowers, and used his power and access to music industry events to lure Miss L back to him. Ms. L was a hopeful yet naive college student and took Mr. Combs at his word and believed that the first R was a possible mulligan and decided to give him a second chance. It's just right there is so Harvey Weinstein. Promises of a career and everything else. Just do what he wants you to do. At the time, Miss L was a college student in her late teens and early 20s. Her decision to return to Mr. Combs after being AR'd is indicative of many assault survivors who return to their abusers. Miss L agreed to meet with Mr. Combs to discuss the business opportunities he promised, as he knew her passion was to pursue a career in fashion and music. They met up and talked near his Manhattan apartment, which was somewhere near 30th Street at the time. Miss L was under the impression that what had occurred months prior between them would not happen again. She was holding on to Mr. Combs' promises of access to his industry to pursue her passion. Mr. Combs was respectful, regained her trust, and used the common interactions with Arista Records, parent company of Bad Boy Records, and Miss L was an intern at Arista Records. Things seemed to be normal between the two until the second incident of SA occurred. So we'll move on to SA Encounter 2. During a second incident of SA, Mr. Combs and Miss L were in a parking garage near his Manhattan apartment. She believes it was somewhere near 30th Street They were headed to dinner, and Mr. Combs was slightly inebriated. As they headed toward the parking garage, Mr. Combs grabbed Miss L by the waist and forced her down to her knees. He quickly unzipped his pants, exposing himself. He then grabbed her hair, wrapping it around his fist. He then forced himself into her mouth and demanded Miss L perform OS. As Miss L's eyes filled with tears, she could see the parking attendant witnessing this horrific assault. This had no impact on Mr. Combs. He was blinded by his lustful desire to pleasure himself at Miss L's expense. When Mr. Combs was done with her, he told her to get up. Miss L was in shock, morally depleted, embarrassed, and in physical agony because of Mr. Combs violently yanking her down to her knees and pulling her hair. I would really like to know who that quote unquote security guard was, because definitely not doing their job. Once again, Ms. L made the decision to distance herself, and once again, Mr. Combs came back with gifts and empty promises. Ms. L was not moved. She had had enough and decided to focus on her studies and leave Mr. Combs for good. Unbeknownst to Ms. L, Mr. Combs was not good at accepting rejection. He immediately switched his approach and became angry, threatening, and forceful. He developed a mobster persona, and Miss L was in fear of him. Mr. Combs began calling Miss L incessantly and would often call her just to say, "If anyone's in your apartment, I will beat your ass and theirs." Ms. L's reasonable fear of Mr. Combs left her feeling stuck with him and with no way out. He knew where she lived, he knew where she worked, and had connections to ensure her compliance with his demands. She felt if she disobeyed him, he would take away her dreams of pursuing a career in his world. Mr. Combs would also threaten to blacklist her in the industry if she tried to mess with him in any way. Miss L's dreams and everything she's been working hard for were in the palm of his hands. SA Encounter 3. One night in 1996, Mr. Combs ordered Miss L to his Manhattan apartment. Mr. Combs' residence was in the 30s and parked near the Midtown Tunnel. When Miss L arrived, Kim Porter and two other people were present. Mr. Combs introduced the women. They went to a nightclub. After the nightclub closed, they returned to Mr. Combs' apartment, and they began a night of drinking. A couple of hours into the evening, Mr. Combs forced Miss Porter and Miss L to take ecstasy. Mr. Combs instructed the women to open their mouths. When they complied with the demand, Mr. Combs forced the pill down their throats to ensure the pills were swallowed. Mr. Combs' hands were so far down Miss L's throat, she gagged. He even checked under their tongues. They do that in jails, prison, psych wards, I think, but he just takes everything a little too far. With the combination of alcohol and ecstasy, Miss L recalls feeling lightheaded and lethargic. After being forced to take ecstasy, Mr. Combs then demanded Kim Porter to have SI with Miss L. Ms. L vocally opposed this idea, but Mr. Combs quickly reminded her that she had no control over the situation, as he can make her lose her job. He's such a good guy. Ms. L knew that she had to comply because she had witnessed what happens when someone defies Mr. Combs. She had also been threatened and victimized by Mr. Combs and did not want to cause a problem because she feared him. As Mr. Combs demanded Miss Porter and Miss L to engage in S, Mr. Combs sat close by, pleasing himself for some time before pushing Kim Porter off Miss L and forcing himself inside her and R-ing her. Ms. L felt numb at that moment and emotionally checked out. A few hours later, Ms. L recalls being woken up by Mr. Combs and told to leave the residence. She felt disgusted, ashamed, and embarrassed and couldn't believe what had happened. Shortly after this event, Ms. L slowly distanced herself from Mr. Combs. Even though she was reluctant to be with him, he used industry connections and invitations to exclusive events to keep her attached. Mr. Combs went so far as to invite her to Kim Porter's birthday celebration. And I think I can read this one. Sean Puffy Combs cordially invites you to attend a birthday celebration in honor of his girlfriend, Kim Porter, Tuesday, December 16th, 1997, at Cheetah in New York City at 10:30 p.m. The evening will feature a special performance by Chico DeBarge. This invitation and sexy formal attire will be required for admission. This invite admits only one. End of the road. In or about 1998, Ms. L found the courage to end her relationship with Mr. Combs. She had finally suffered enough. However, this ending was one-sided. Mr. Combs and Kim Porter weren't done with Ms. L. Kim Porter was very resentful of Ms. L after she was forced to engage in acts with Ms. L. She dined at Ms. L's place of employment, a bar named Sliver, which was in Soho. According to Ms. L, Ms. Porter was enraged when she saw her. According to Ms. L, 2 days later, Ms. Porter called her employer and complained to the manager, alleging that Ms. L attempted to poison her. She then stated that her boyfriend was Sean Combs and could have the business shut down if he didn't immediately terminate Ms. L. Later that evening, the manager told her he had to let her go because Mr. Combs called and demanded that he fire her. Ms. L believes that Ms. Porter got Ms. L fired in retaliation for what Mr. Combs made them do. According to Ms. L, her boss was afraid of Mr. Combs and his contacts and told her he had to do it or Mr. Combs could risk getting his business closed. Ms. L called Mr. Combs and he showed no remorse that she was out of a job. In fact, he laughed about it. At the time she ended their relationship, Ms. L recalls Mr. Combs' member in his pants being adolescently in both length and width. She recalls him being circumcised and remembers a tattoo on his chest. Sean John clothing. While in a relationship with Mr. Combs, Ms. L was a student at FIT. She had a passion for fashion, and Mr. Combs knew this. Mr. Combs promised Ms. L several working opportunities in the fashion and music industry, and the two often discussed his plans to launch his own clothing brand. Within months of Ms. L ending their relationship, Mr. Combs launched Sean John. I don't like the way that rolled off my tongue, Sean John. Ugh. According to Ms. L, she saw Mr. Combs at an event at Rockefeller Center in or about the end of 2000, towards the beginning of 2001. At the time, Ms. L says Mr. Combs may have been filming a season of Making of the Band. It wasn't even a good show, but according to Ms. L, when Mr. Combs saw her, he approached Ms. L and asked the camera crew to turn off the cameras to not film their interaction. According to Ms. L, Mr. Combs asked her how she was, expressed to her that he missed her, and asked if she would leave the event at Rockefeller Center with him. Ms. L rejected Mr. Combs and left. According to Ms. L, later that evening, he kept calling her and asking her if she would come to his apartment on Park Avenue, but she said no. He even offered to send his driver to pick her up. Finally, he offered to come with the driver to pick her up. According to Ms. L, Mr. Combs does not like the word no. He called a few more times, so she just stopped answering the phone. According to Ms. L, a few days later, he called again, begging to see her. Reluctantly and regrettably, she allowed him to come over to her apartment located Park West, that's all I'm going to say, to hear what he had to say. Ms. L figured it was during the day and doubted that he would try to harm her. According to Ms. L, when she opened the door, his security was sitting on the stairwell. Knowing that security was there made Ms. L feel a little better about letting him in. They sat on her couch and began talking. According to Ms. L, Mr. Combs began apologizing for his past behaviors. He started telling her that he was a changed man. He then showered her with compliments, telling her how good she looked and kept reminiscing about their prior life. He then began dropping hints about them having Fs. Ms. L rejected his advances. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Mr. Combs violently grabbed her and forced himself onto her. He began kissing and touching her against her will. At that point, Mizell fought him off after she quickly realized it was a big mistake to have allowed him to visit her. She told him to leave as she felt that he was just wanted to use her for S and hadn't changed at all. Even more disgusting was the fact that Miss L knew that Mr. Combs was involved in a very public relationship with J-Lo or Jennifer Lopez. And there's a picture of J-Lo and Puffy together during this time period. According to several media reports from that time, Mr. Combs ended his relationship with J-Lo due to infidelity in February of 2001. This was around the same time that Mr. Combs essayed Ms. L. Luckily for Ms. L, the couch was right near the door of the apartment, so it was easy for her to reach the door, open it, and demand for him to leave. She ensured that his security could hear her telling him to exit. She was afraid that Mr. Combs would have AR'd her, as he does not take no for an answer and had a history of violently handling her and forcing her to perform O on him. Miss L is in possession of several of Mr. Combs' phone numbers throughout the years. And then there's just a picture of some numbers. It's a lot of it's like blacked out or redacted. Miss L discovered that Mr. Combs recorded and disclosed a tape of him having S with her. I have to breathe for a second. This is just insane. Like, I don't understand men. I really don't. Not saying all men are like this, but the ones that are, I don't know. I just can't understand it. I don't get it. So, according to Miss L, in or about 2023, Miss L was at a function and a gentleman, redacted, informed the man Miss L was dating that he should reconsider dating her because he personally saw a video of her and Sean Combs having S. According to Miss L, redacted shared that he saw the tape during the summer of 1997. According to Mr. Shouldn't that say Ms. L? She was told that Mr. Combs apparently recorded them having S without her knowledge and showed it to multiple people. First cause of action. Ms. L incorporates by reference all preceding paragraphs and re-alleges them as if set forth fully herein. The defendant committed battery against Miss L when he penetrated Miss L orally and vaginally against her will, as detailed in the 4 encounters above. In addition, Miss Combs physically assaulted Miss L when he pulled her hair and forced her to perform OS on him in the open parking garage with the parking attendant watching. Oh, earlier I said security guard, but it was a parking attendant still. How could anybody just sit there and watch something like that happen? Defendant Combs intentionally and without her consent attacked Miss L to satisfy his S desires. Under all circumstances, the defendant's physical contact with Miss L was offensive and wrongful. Defendant Combs continued to attack Miss L despite her attempts to thwart his actions. The defendant's conduct was the direct and proximate cause of Miss L's past and future substantial damages, including significant pain and suffering, lasting psychological and financial harm, loss of dignity, and invasion of privacy. The defendant's actions constitute S offenses as defined, and I'm not going to read all the articles, but including but not limited to S misconduct, and then plaintiff claim for battery is thus timely under the Gender Motivated Violence Act. The second cause, these are going to be, the causes are all pretty much repeating the first one I just read, so I won't go over all of them. They mention emotional distress that might and or likely would cause illness or bodily harm, unreasonable risk of causing emotional distress. I mean, yeah, I agree. Fourth cause of action is going to be pretty much the same thing. The above described conduct of defendant Combs, including but not limited to Combs' assault of plaintiff in New York City, constitutes a crime of violence against plaintiff and is a crime of violence motivated by gender. The term crime of violence means an act or series of acts that would constitute a misdemeanor or felony against the person as defined in the state or federal law that would constitute a misdemeanor or felony against property as defined in state or federal law if the conduct presents a serious risk of physical injury to another, whether or not those acts have actually resulted in criminal charges, prosecution, or conviction. The term crime of violence motivated by gender means a crime of violence committed because of gender or on the basis of gender and due at least in part to an animus based on the victim's gender. Okay. So, and then it goes into defendant SME and their subsidiary AR enabled Mr. Combs to commit the crime of violence motivated. As detailed above, Ms. L worked for Arista Records during Mr. Combs' assault. Bad Boy Records was a subsidiary of Arista. At the time, Ms. L reported to her manager, Jeff, who was an agent of Arista Records. And the footnote says presently Ms. L does not recall Jeff's last name, but we are in the process of locating it. Once we learn his name, we will amend the pleading. Defendants AR and SME enabled or participated in the S abuse of plaintiff because defendants failed to, among other things, protect plaintiff from a known danger, have sufficient policies and procedures in place to prevent S assault, properly implement policies and procedures to prevent S assault, take reasonable measures to ensure that policies to prevent S assault were working, train their employees on identifying S assault and inappropriate workplace behaviors, protect their employees from S assault, and adhere to the applicable standard of care. Defendants Arista Records enabled or participated in the S abuse of plaintiff because defendants failed to timely and properly educate, train, supervise, and or monitor their agents or employees regarding policies and procedures that should be followed when S abuse is suspected or observed. Prior to Combs' S assaulting plaintiff, Arista Records knew or should have known that Combs was not fit to be in a position of authority. Defendants by and through their agents, servants, or employees became aware or should have became aware, oh my goodness, of Combs' propensity to commit SA and of the risk to the plaintiff's safety. At the very least, defendants knew or should have known that they did not have sufficient information about whether or not their leaders, managers, and people were safe to be in positions of power. Defendant Arista Records knew or should have known that Combs posed a risk of SA. Defendant Arista failed to properly supervise Combs and protect plaintiff from a known danger, thereby enabling Combs' repeated essays on plaintiff. Defendant Arista negligently deemed Mr. Combs was fit to be in a position of authority and or that any previous suitability problems Mr. Combs had were fixed and cured and or that Mr. Combs would not commit acts of SA and or that Mr. Combs would not injure others. Moreover, defendant Arista Records enabled the SA of plaintiff by actively maintaining and employing Mr. Combs in a position of power and authority through which Mr. Combs had control over people, including plaintiff. As a direct and proximate result of the aforementioned crime of violence and gender-motivated violence, plaintiff has sustained and will continue to sustain monetary damages, physical injury, pain and suffering, and serious psychological and emotional distress, entitling her to an award of compensatory and punitive damages, injunctive and declaratory relief, attorney's fees and costs, and other remedies at this court as this court may deem appropriate. Damages as set forth in. The above described conduct of defendants constitutes a S offense as defined in Article 130 of the New York Penal Law. Pursuant to 10-1105, this cause of action is timely because it is commenced within 2 years and 6 months after September 1st of 2022. Prayer for relief. Wherefore, I just sound like I'm reading a novel and I'm not. This is disturbing. Wherefore, plaintiff prays that the court enter judgment in her favor and against defendants containing the following relief. For a money judgment representing compensatory damages, including consequential damages, lost wages, earnings, and all other sums of money, together with interest on these amounts according to proof. B, for a money judgment for mental pain and anguish and severe emotional distress according to proof. C, for punitive and exemplary damages according to proof. D, for attorney's fees and costs. E, for pre-judgment and post-judgment interest. And F, such other and further relief as the court may deem just and proper. Plaintiff hereby demands a trial by jury on all issues of fact and damages stated herein. And then go down. Oh, this is okay. Attorney verifications. So that's all these are now. Preservation notice, electronically stored information, paper information. So there we go. And I have I think 3 other lawsuits. I'm not going to read them all tonight, but I think I have 3 other lawsuits, or maybe 4 other lawsuits. And then we got do I want to go on to that, like down that rabbit hole right now? Maybe not. But that's the lawsuit from Miss L. And I'm curious as to if she's going to be, because again, and I will continue to say this because Mark and whatever Diddy's attorney's name is, I know it's Mark something. Just because of the fact he wanted to point out with so much confidence that there's only one victim, blah, blah, blah. But we know that in the indictment and in the press conference, victims, persons, it was thorough for all of them. So I will read another one of the lawsuits probably tomorrow, maybe 2 of the lawsuits, depending on how long they are. And I will keep digging. Like I said, it's going to be interesting. It's one of those things, people like with Epstien, everybody, all of a sudden, nobody knew Epstien, right? And now people are starting to distance themselves from Diddy. So let's see what else happens between now and tomorrow. Bye.